Hello and welcome to a new episode of The Officer's Desk, a brand new show on ThePrint and a very unique one at that, where we have every week a retired civil servant come here and talk to us about their very long 30 to 40-year-old career in different services, the IAS, IPS, the foreign service, etc. And they tell us how the Indian state really functions, how when they were in the service, they saw India change, the experiences they had while the country was changing through these decades. And today I have with me a person you're all very familiar with, Mr. Ashok Lavasa. He's a
Thank you.
retired IAS officer and a former election commissioner. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Thank you for inviting me.
Sir, I first up want to ask you a question that I ask everyone. You joined the IAS in 1980. What made you join the IAS?
Oh, how long do you want the answer to be?
As long as you want it to be.
Well, first of all, let me say that I didn't want to join the IAS. Nobody in my family or extended family has ever worked for the government, had ever worked for the government. My first choice was teaching. And I was fortunate that immediately after our results for the MA English were declared, I got a job in Delhi University. I taught for 1.5 years. But when we were teaching, I realized two things. One is that the UGC changed their rules and they said that henceforth, any lecturer, if he wants to earn a promotion, he must be a PhD. So that really put me off. And I said, why should I study? Because someone else wants me to study. So that was one. And I couldn't foresee myself being a lecturer for 40, 45 years. So that set me thinking. The second thing which I realized, which I think most people don't agree with, but I am a firm believer, that you should not mix your passion with your profession. So I said, if I want to retain my love for literature, I should stop teaching it. So then it was a question of what next? And like everyone else, which we used to consider a national pastime, I appeared for the competitive exams, which included, by the way, the State Bank of India. The results for the State Bank of India came first. So I joined the State Bank of India. I left teaching. And within 6 months of that, I got selected in the IAS. And I left my bank job and joined the civil services. And that is a short story of my entry into the IAS.
And then how was training like? It was in Missouri at the time, I believe it still is. How were the training years like?
Well, at that time, the training in Missouri and the 2-year training, it used to be what we call the sandwich pattern. So you joined in the foundation course, and the foundation course comprised of all the services to which people were selected along with us, which meant that people from audit and accounts, people from police, foreign service, everyone was there who were selected for class 1 services. That gave a lot of integrated perspective. In between, I think thereafter there were experiments of splitting the foundation, etc. But let's not get into that. Thereafter the foundation, we used to do the phase 1 training, which was about 4 months, which was restricted only for the IAS. And it was during that period that we were taken on an all India study tour, which popularly was called Bharat Darshan.
Okay.
But the interesting part of Bharat Darshan was that that time it was all by train because there were hardly any flights. And secondly, it comprised of some very interesting engagements with the tribals. For example, we had to live in a tribal area for a week, which we did in Andhra Pradesh, in Vizag, Paderu block of Visakhapatnam. We had a public sector attachment. We had an attachment with an agriculture university, the Pant University in Nainital. So on and so forth. And we visited the Amul Milk Society and all that, to study the beginning of the cooperative movement. After phase 1, you came back, you went to the district. So that was a long period of 1 year where you got field training, and because you were assigned to different cadres, during that phase, people were also expected to learn the language of that state, familiarize themselves with the laws of the state and the administrative systems. The District training in itself was also very comprehensive at that time. You had an irrigation tour, for example, in Haryana. All the irrigation systems of Haryana are located in Himachal Pradesh or in Punjab. So you have to go there and see what is the significance of those systems for the state. You have to do a police training, attachment with the police station, attachment with the superintendent of police. And those days, we also were conferred powers of judicial magistrate for 15 days. So you actually sat in the court and decided judicial criminal cases. So that was very fascinating. You had an attachment with the treasury, with the jail, so on and so forth, apart from the normal revenue training. Those days, Haryana didn't have an Institute of Public Administration, which it now has. It's located in Gurgaon. So we spent pretty much the entire 1 year in the district to which we were allotted. I was allotted to Sirsa in Haryana. And interestingly, during that 1 year, we also had an attachment with the police academy of the state. And in that complex, which is in Madhuban, you had a forensic science laboratory where you had to go and see how they do the forensic work. You had the armed police headquarters. So there was an attachment with that. So that was the nature of district training. And of course, that also meant you wrote a diary and sent it to your counselor every month, etc. For which
Who is a counselor again?
the counselor for us was a person called Mr. S.H. Mohan.
But this is also an IAS officer.
He was a police officer, but he was a deputy director in the academy. And after you finished this training, you went back to Mussoorie for what they call phase 2. And that pretty much is the 2 year. And then in our case, after phase 2, we were sent for an army attachment. And we went to Tenga Valley in Arunachal Pradesh. So that pretty much completed the 2 year training.
So, as you've already mentioned, you were allocated the Haryana cadre. Now, this is also very soon after the Green Revolution takes place in Haryana, because you go to Haryana in the early 80s, and Haryana has by now become one of the richest states along with Punjab. So, how did you see that transformation on the district level when you were posted there? Were villages changing? Was the success story of the Green Revolution very stark the moment you came, you hit the districts in Haryana?
Excellent question. And let me tell you two things. First of all, during our training in the foundation course, we were sent for a village attachment. For 3 days, you had to go and live in a village. Some of our friends went to Haryana. And, generally the expectation and the image that you have of a village you had those days was that everyone is poor and farmers are suffering and there is no food and all that. And these guys who went to Kurukshetra district in Haryana, they came back with stories which they found were astounding, in the sense that in the column where you have to write the annual income of the family, the income of some of the farmers ran into 5 figures.
Wow.
And they were quite astounded. They thought that हम तो जाके कुछ सत्यजीत रे type poverty देखेंगे और ये हमने क्या देखा. But anyway, when they came back and told us the stories, that time the cadre allocation had not taken place. It was later, because in our time the system was different. When I got allocated to Haryana and when I went for my district training, so here is the first taste of Haryana. I traveled by bus from Dehradun to Ambala, because I had to take a train from Ambala, which took me to Sirsa via Bhatinda.
Okay.
So on the way, my bhabhi, she used to live in Yamunanagar, she came to the bus stand and gave me food. तो वो खाना मैंने खा लिया. When I reached Ambala station, I had not finished that food. There was a lot of it left. So I said कि भाई इस खाने को अब मैं क्या करूँगा? तो let me give it to somebody. You will be surprised. I did not find anybody who I thought I can give this food to. And finally, after looking around at the railway platform for more than an hour, when the train was about to come, I said, I can't carry this food. So I went to vendor who used a pyao kind of place where water is dispensed. So there was a lady sitting there with matkas of water. And I said कि बहुत डरते हुए मैंने उनसे कहा कि मेरे पास कुछ खाना है तो मैं आपको दे दूं क्या? And she looked at me and she said, इधर रख दीजिए, कोई आएगा तो दे दूंगी. So that was Haryana. It was really a symbol of green revolution, which was bringing prosperity. But the other dimension of Haryana was that the initial governments, which had taken were in power in the beginning, and I'm talking of 1981 when I went to the state, but Haryana was created in 1966, so it had already seen more than 14, 15 years. There was so much investment in infrastructure in the state, whether it was road connectivity or electricity or water supply. So it gave the impression of being a state which was on the move. And one other thing that I must tell you, share with you is, for example, when Punjab was divided, so we had officers, let's say two brothers who were in Punjab. One of them got allocated to Haryana and the other remained in Punjab. And this person who came to Haryana, he used to tell us that when the state was divided and the officers got allocated to Haryana, Punjab officers actually sympathized and pitied them that we don't even know whether you'll be able to get your salaries. And by the time we joined the state, things had already started changing. Punjab, of course, was also very prosperous and doing well, which is not the case now. And Haryana has overtaken Punjab in almost all indicators. But so that was the initial impression of Haryana. But then there was another side of the state, which I discovered when I went to Sirsa. That place was a desert.
Sirsa was
when
Western,
1981.
Right, but this is as what? What was your designation?
I was under trainee, assistant commissioner under trainee.
Okay.
So when I reached there on the 29th of May, it was so hot, it was so warm. And I got allotted a small room in the PWD guest house. And I used to find that, because of being a desert area, the evenings were cooler. So this chowkidar of the rest house, he would sleep outside with a mosquito net, enjoy the little cool breeze. And I was dumped in this little room where a rickety cooler was there. So it was quite miserable. And there used to be a lot of sandstorms. So one day I told this chowkidar कि भाई यहाँ तो बहुत आंधियाँ आती है. He said, नहीं जनाब, एक आंधी आती है, मई में शुरू होती है, जुलाई में खत्म होती है. So that was the nature of this region of Haryana. Today, people can't believe that when the buses went from Sirsa to Ellenabad, which is the town near Rajasthan, or to other cities in Rajasthan, they actually carried two beldars in the bus to remove the sand from the road. इतनी आंधियां वहां आती थी. तो ये पूरी बेल्ट जो हरियाणा की है, which is the western southern belt, Bhiwani, Hisar, Sirsa, Mahendragarh partly, this was all prone to desertification. And actually that time the nation and this region faced the problem of advancing of the Thar desert.
Right.
Therefore, a program was launched by the government of India called the Desert Development Program.
Achha.
And that was one of the important programs which used to be implemented in this part of the state, along with another program called Command Area Development Authority. So that was a program to irrigate the fields, and desert development was a program to arrest the advancement of the desert by doing soil conservation, planting of trees, etc.
I think these experiences are so important because I think most people identify IAS officers straight away as becoming DMs and then thereby exuding a lot of power and having that kind of an aura. So these experiences are very important. But now I will come to your time as a DM. And first you became a district magistrate in Gurgaon in 1987. Tell us, what was Gurgaon like at the time? Was it still, even then, such a plum posting that it's considered now?
Well, Gurgaon has been historically an important district because of its size and because of its proximity to Delhi. But let's not forget that Gurgaon also has probably had those days one of the most backward areas of the country, which is the Mewat region.
Correct.
Now Mewat has been separated into an independent district. So Gurgaon was big. Faridabad earlier used to be a part of Gurgaon. It was carved out as a separate district. But the Gurgaon of those days did not see the kind of urbanization process which started later in the 90s. And today, you live in Gurgaon, but you may not know that the civil lines area of Gurgaon, where the deputy commissioner and others lived, it used to be protected by a band, which is called the Jharsa Band. That band still exists, but it serves no purpose because
What was its purpose back then?
its purpose was to protect the civil lines area from all the flooding that would take place because the waters of Sona Hills from Badshahpur onwards would come flow towards this side. So this area was protected and this water was meant to flow into the Nazafgarh drain. There is a Dhasa Bandh which is in Delhi. So that is the reservoir for collecting this excess water. It still exists and there are beautiful birds there even today, but not many people know about it. But that reservoir would take the spillover of river Sahibi, which again has probably disappeared. So the Sahibi river overflow would accumulate there. That would go into the Nazafgarh drain, and the Nazafgarh drain will bring that water to the Yamuna. So this was part of that entire river system. That was Gurgaon. The urbanization had not even started. And this highway, which you see today, didn't exist. The earlier national highway used to go through the town from near the DC's residence. And the DC's residence itself had a fascinating history to it. It was built in 1835.
Acha.
It was the palace of Begum Samru, who didn't belong to this place. She belonged to Meerut. But she married a Britisher and he probably got this palace constructed for her. So the DC's residence is still in that building. But Gurgaon also later, by the time I joined in 1987, had also started witnessing industrialization. And that industrialization was triggered by two things. One, proximity to Delhi. And the fact that at that time, there were pressure started building up in Delhi on removing industries from Delhi.
Right.
And Haryana was very careful in declaring that Gurgaon will be a no pollution industrial zone. So we didn't want to get all the polluting industries from Delhi, but we wanted to industrialize.
So what were the kind of industries?
So
that
it
came
was
into this?
textile, for example, or electronic industries had just started coming in. So they were encouraged, design centers. So the garment industry came in a big way. And of course, with the coming of Maruti in Gurgaon, which happened in the late 80s, the automobile industry started booming a lot. So today, if you go to Udyog Vihar, all these sectors are full of automobile industry, auto parts. Of course, many of them have now moved out. So that was Gurgaon. And the other feature of Gurgaon, which is very visible now, is that Gurgaon also provided an extension to the lifestyle of South Delhi. So the residential area automatically grew. The DLF actually started initially in Delhi. And then they took over places in Gurgaon, developed them. So Gurgaon also presented, I think, one of the first examples of urbanization by both public sector as well as private sector. Because Huda, which was the Haryana Urban Development Authority, they started creating their sectors. But today, if you see, most of their original sectors are on the other side of the city. which is where the Dwarka Expressway is now coming up. And this side of the city, which is now the glitzy part,
It's entirely private.
entirely private.
So, if you can explain to our viewers, sir, what was your role during all this transition, just to understand what a DM who's at the center of all these changes taking place, industry coming, private sector coming, setting up the whole city in a sense. So, what is the role of the DM in all of this, and also then handling a place like Mewat, which is a completely like contradictory sort of experience of the rest of Gurgaon. So, what was your role like?
Well, specifically in cases of urbanization, because there is a dedicated agency, Urban Development Authority, so they are responsible for the planning, and but of course, as a district magistrate, you will be consulted, you will be aware of how the land use is being planned, and how land, because they have to acquire land, and the deputy commissioner is the person who helps them in land acquisition, because he's the revenue authority in the district. So, and when industrialization took place, then the various labor industrial issues that came up there, again, because law and order district magistrate is involved. So that is one part of your responsibility. But the other big part is, let's say, an area like Mewat, which was so backward. And there was a separate Mewat Development Agency, which was chaired by the Deputy Commissioner. So you had to devise programs for that area, which was totally neglected. And apart from the neglect, this was also an area where you had an entire community which was different from the community that resided in Gurgaon. And the community had a history. And the history was that during the partition, they wanted to migrate to Pakistan. But Gandhiji came to a village called Ghasera in Gurgaon. That room where he sat still exists. He sat there and he persuaded these people that please don't leave India. And they stayed back. So there are a lot of sensitivities attached to that area. In fact, you could also see how the demographic changes or how the sociological changes had taken place in that area. Because in many of the cases which I used to see as revenue officer, the case would say that the complainant is, let's say, a person whose name is Ishwar Khan. So you could see how things have changed. But so development challenges, sociological challenges in that area were huge. The literacy levels in Mewat, by the way, were among the lowest in the country. You had people, government officials, who didn't want to serve in that area because of lack of amenities. So these were the challenges which as a deputy commissioner, you had to take note of and find some kind of solutions wherever these problems existed.
Is there any story from Mewat that you remember that was very stark, an experience or?
Well, I would not be able to recall, but yes, for example, the Rose Ka Mev area, there is an area called Rose Ka Mev. When that was being developed as an industrial area, as a sort of gateway to Mewat, and the government thought that, if we set up some industries here, it will give fillip to employment, and then the nature of that area will change. It was very hard to get that started. So in managing the affairs of that process of industrialization, the deputy commissioner would get involved off and on.
So also then in the late 80s and very early 90s, you were serving in the industries department in Haryana. This is also a time when liberalization of the country begins to happen. So what I want to understand is, how long did it take for the liberalization of the economy to start showing effects at the local level? How did your work as an IAS officer who was posted in the industries department of a state like Haryana change, especially because Haryana was still an agrarian, primarily an agrarian state? So what was that transition like?
So there are two or three things that I want to tell you as far as industrialization is concerned. See, one of the things which Haryana took advantage of was the fact that there were 4 national highways originating from Delhi and cutting across Haryana. So it realized that here is an advantage, a competitive advantage in a sense, that the traffic moving, that accessibility issue is already solved. So can you now give a fillip to economic activity? That was one part. The second was that we identified different pockets in the state, which was in line with Government of India's backward area development scheme. So the Government of India would run number of schemes for development of backward areas through industrialization. So you had industrial parks in, say, an area like Narayangarh. You had an industrial area in a place like Bawal, in Barwala, and all these places which were really unheard of. It was very difficult to persuade industrialists to invest in these areas. But it was very difficult to even persuade people to invest in Gurgaon initially.
Was that part of your job?
Yeah.
So
when I was in industries.
How did you go about this?
So I had a stint both as director industries and managing director of the State Industrial Development Corporation. So as MD, for example, I would come to Udyog Vihar almost every month, sit with the people who had got the plots allotted to them, and hear them out on why they are not investing. Because if they had taken a plot for industrialization, they must invest. So a lot of my time would be consumed in talking to them, hearing their grievances, in some cases actually resuming the plots, because we thought that they had no intentions of investing, they were just doing speculation. The other was to take advantage of Government of India scheme. The Government of India floated a scheme called growth centers. So we immediately went to the Government of India. They would give you 10 crores for investing in a growth center. We created a growth center in Bawal, which was on National Highway number 8. Today, it's a booming industrial estate. But industrialization there was not easy. You had to literally go one-on-one to the investors and request them. I can name the 6 first industries where personally you had to go and request them and convince them that this is not a bad place to invest.
What were some of the industries?
So let's say YKK. They set up the 49th unit in the world in Bawal. And today I think they have 5 units in Bawal. Or the Sony Corporation. They came to Dantewada, which is next to. And bringing them in was also a very interesting story. They were looking for locations, and they had identified a location in Maharashtra and Haryana. And like the typical commercially minded, smart investors that they were bargaining very hard till one day our chief secretary told their managing director that, look, as long as you invest in India, it's fine. You may go to Maharashtra if you want. But then we had to actually find their local contact in Calcutta to find out from them that what is of strategic importance to these people. Why are they taking so long in deciding? Till we came across, till that person disclosed to us that actually they are looking for a place where they can start their production in the quickest possible time. So then we said, okay, let's forget plot. एक इनको बनी बनाई फैक्ट्री लीज पे दिलवा देते हैं, which is what we did. And then they started production there. So in the case of Sony, we contacted their local person and he told us that these people are looking for the quickest possible way in which they can start production. And then we changed our plan. We got them a bani banai factory on lease. It was in Dantewada. It was lying abandoned. So we just contacted the owner of that building, and he was very happy to lease out his building to Sony, and they quickly started their production. But another interesting and almost a path-breaking story about Haryana's industrialization is the industrial model township of Manesar.
Correct.
Not many people know today that IMT Manesar was originally conceived as a Japanese city. There was a competition on which was actually piloted by the Government of India. And in the late 80s, So JICA, the Japanese Investment Corporation Agency, they actually funded a study on identifying an ideal location. 4 sites were identified in India. Bidadi in Karnataka, Bangalore in Karnataka, Noida, and 4th was our Manesar, because we jumped into the fray at a late stage. There was a company in Japan, Yachio Engineering, which did the feasibility study of all the 4 places. Eventually, after 2-3 years, we got picked up. And this was in 1993. Interestingly, and probably this might be a unique story, 3 big business houses of Japan, Mitsubishi, Marubeni, and Mitsui, they set up a joint venture, a consortium, in partnership with HSIDC to build the IMT.
Oh, wow.
The plan, everything was made. Unfortunately, what happened by that time was that the industrial climate in Japan and their economy nosedived. They went into a recession and they remained in that trough. And the internal surveys that they did in Japan did not inspire them enough to make this big investment. So eventually, the joint venture never materialized, but then HSITC developed IMT on their own. And you can see what a booming industrial area it is. Just one more thing, Sanya, I must share with you, because this is a lost story of privatization. One of the first state public sector undertakings to be privatized in India was Haryana Breweries Limited.
Okay.
It happened in 1994. And it was done through an extremely transparent process by employing SBI CAPS as a transaction advisor. They carried out the process. It was a fantastic deal for us because both the state government and HSIDC were invested in Haryana breweries. We got a very good price. If I remember right, it was 57 rupees for a share which had never quoted more than 26 in the market. And that deal went through so smoothly. But not many people talk about that as a good case of successful privatization. So Haryana was moving in many fronts.
Yeah, but the popular impression of the relationship of the bureaucracy with privatization is that the bureaucracy would resist privatization, and the bureaucracy, even now, I think people think that the bureaucracy was resisting liberalization. Is that impression accurate? Because from your experience, it looks like it's not. And if you zoom out a little bit, how did liberalization and privatization change bureaucracy at large?
So I think when you say bureaucracy is resisting, I think we should look for resistance or willingness in the entire system, which is not only bureaucracy. In this case, for example, we found that the political leadership was totally committed. That get rid of these 2 units. Incidentally, there were 2 units which we put on for sale. One of them didn't happen. The Haryana Concast Limited in Hisar. That didn't go through. But Haryana Breweries went through. I think the environment overall at that time was such. There was a government in Delhi which was promoting LPG, liberalization, privatization. And Haryana wanted to demonstrate, because it always had a track record of moving very fast, a very dynamic state. So we wanted to show that, yes, we are on board and this is what we did. So, but if you find that there are reservations on the part of bureaucracy, that may happen because of 2 reasons. One is the process is not thorough, in the sense that if your documentation, if your valuation and all that is not done very professionally, then people start developing hesitation because of the possibility of being questioned later. So I think that is one big part. The other is that whenever you privatize, there are some difficult issues to handle. And these issues require political will. For example, in Haryana breweries, when we were doing it, the labor union was against that. But we comforted the labor union with full backing of the political leadership, because they have to manage the politics of it. That we will not reduce anybody's rank or anybody's pay for 2 years. Nobody will be removed. Number two, no assets of this company will be stripped for 2 years. So, similarly, there were many other measures taken to mitigate their, risk perception. With the result that when it was privatized, I still remember that in 2 months, the factory was taking the production in 2 shifts, what we were doing in 3 shifts earlier. So gradually, I think, so once you handle these issues, then I think things become a little easy.
After this, I'll get into your time at the center, but I have to ask you, you also served briefly in the tourism department of Haryana. Now, as a layperson, one would not associate Haryana with some kind of raging tourism sector. So, I want to ask you a larger question: that do you think there are a lot of positions in both state governments and the central governments that are in some way redundant?
You're right. Today, it seems that this is redundant, and I think it is, because the private sector has come up in a big way. But that time, the development of tourism facilities was seen as a strategy for economic growth of the state and projecting the state again as a dynamic, progressive state. As I said, Haryana had no natural assets. It had very few historical assets. Kurukshetra was there, Pinjore was there. So, what did they do? I think Haryana sensed two needs of people, society. One, people who travel on these 4 national highways, they need a decent place to stop for having tea and for relieving themselves. And you will not believe, you'll laugh. The Oasis tourist complex in Karnal, which was one of the first highway amenities which we created. Earlier, when I was MD, if you went to the complex and if you saw the visitors register, maximum compliments you would get for the cleanest toilets on GT Road.
Oh, wow.
So that was one. The second thing was that getaways for city dwellers, weekend getaways. So that's how Surajkund complex. It originally belonged to the government of India.
Okay.
It was taken over by the state. This is a reverse story. Okay. It was taken over by the Haryana tourism, and they developed weekend resorts. Bhatkal, Hodal, Surajkund, Damdama, all these places came up as weekend resorts. All of them were 1.5 hours from Delhi. And the third thing which Haryana did, which I think was very visionary on the part of the people who conceived this, Mr. S.K. Mishra, was the Surajkund Crafts Mela.
And you were in the tourism department?
That time I was in the tourism department. I think when I was there, we had the 5th and the 6th Surajkund Crafts Mela. What that did was to showcase the Indian culture, crafts, and cuisine, blended into one festival. And it caught on. Today, all the states, all conceivable places have this kind of blend for displaying. And also it brought the crafts to the forefront. Could they find a market without the use of intermediaries? So that was the kind of thinking which went into the development of Haryana tourism. But as you rightly said, that today the times have changed. The context has changed. In fact, most of the national highways, you find they have built flyovers which bypass the tourist complexes. So they are at a disadvantage. And we started realizing this even when I was MD of Haryana Tourism in 1991. And then we said that now, can we change our strategy a bit? So what should we do? We are located in towns. So what do the growing towns of Haryana require? They require meeting places. They require banquet halls. So you will find that most of these tourist complexes, we created this infrastructure. कि कुछ तो बिजनेस हमको मिलना चाहिए. लेकिन I think the time has come when the state needs to get out of all this.
Before I want to ask you to zoom in on this point that you made, that there are some redundant departments, commissions, posts in the government, and there are so many commissions that one sometimes reads about and you don't even know why they exist. Do you think, because you've served in such senior positions in the central government as well, including the finance ministry later, do you think there is resistance on the part of the state to actually take a call on these things? And where does that resistance come from? Is it the political leadership or is it the bureaucracy? Where does it come from?
All of them. So, there was a time when the economic reforms process started that we were talking about downsizing the government. Then people thought that, downsizing is a dangerous word. So people started using the word right sizing the government. And during that period, if you notice, the recruitment to governments, and now I am talking of government of India, slowed down, including the All India Civil Services.
This is what period?
So this would be the late 80s, early 90s. More like early 90s. So during that period, you will find, and it's a matter of statistics, so it's not that I'm making it up. The recruitment to the All India services also dwindled. There were batches in the IAS, for example, where 50 people were recruited. Today, that number is 180. The police, I'm told this year there are 200 IPS officers who have been recruited. I was in the Home Ministry in 2009-10 when this problem was flagged. That, because of the policy of the government at that time, there is acute shortage of officers at different levels, in different states, in paramilitary organizations. So how do we step that up? And then government started recruiting more and more people. But I think the essential issue is we have to get out of functions. Should the government shed some of the functions that it does and let private sector or any outsourced agency handle those functions? Till the government gets out of the functions, you can't reduce your manpower. And it's not, by the way, that the government manpower has increased manifold. That's not the case. But then, if you start analyzing how much work are government departments getting done through outsourced agencies, which is earlier the essential work of the secretariat or the government. So it will be quite a revelation. The more fundamental thing, and this is something very interesting since you mentioned, I recall that when we were in the finance ministry, we would sometimes informally do this exercise that, let's say, if you started counting the number of ministries which should exist in Government of India. So sometimes you would find that more than 50% ministries should not exist because those functions are discharged by the state. So what are these ministries doing?
You mean by the state governments?
By the state government, not this. Yeah, you're right. So they belong to the state list as far as the constitution is concerned. So should not these things be completely handled by the state? And Government of India, if at all it is providing some assistance, financial assistance, or even if it is conceiving some national level programs, it should have a very skeleton kind of operation or infrastructure to manage that. But I don't think sufficient headway has been made in this regard. And there would be actually instances of the organizations multiplying than being reduced.
Why do you think that happens? Because, since in the last about 10 years since I have been covering bureaucracy, this entire rhetoric of reducing or minimizing government has been so loud. I have myself done stories which in retrospect have just proven to be false, because there used to be these proposals in the government that will reduce civil services to 4 or 5 civil services. Right now, I don't know, there are probably 25 in the most elite of the civil services. Where is the problem coming? Because we've even had the prime minister on the floor of the parliament say कि IAS क्यों सब चला रहे हैं, सिविल एविएशन भी वो चला रहे हैं, फर्टिलाइजर और केमिकल्स भी वो चला रहे हैं. So where is the resistance coming from? And of course, he's not the first prime minister to have this kind of a sentiment. Back in the 60s, Nehru said that my biggest regret has been that I've not been able to reform the civil services. So where is this sort of dichotomy coming from?
So I think the generalist versus the specialist is a different argument. The overall size of the government is a different argument. So I don't think that people who advocate right sizing the government say that IA should be disbanded and only specialist services should exist. I don't think that is their argument. So if you want to downsize, then as I said, you have to reduce functions. There is no other way in which you can do it. The point is whether there is a concerted plan in this regard. The point is whether people want this to happen. And when I say people, I mean both the bureaucracy and the political executive. How committed is the government to doing this? Because having spent 40 years or more in public life, I'm fairly convinced that if the government decides, it can happen. It will have could be a painful process because it's not easy to, but then shedding functions means also giving up a little bit of authority. Do you want to continue the system where there is some joint secretary or somebody presiding over, lording over some funds and saying that this is what I can give to this state, this is what I can do to that state? I think that kind of arrangement and that psyche will have to change.
So you came to the center on deputation, I think in 97 when you were
Yes.
posted in the finance ministry. Now, just I want to ask you something about the 97 budget, because it's Chidambaram's budget. It's called the dream budget. Do you have any memories of it?
I came in September. By that time,
Okay, it was already done.
yeah.
It was already done.
Yeah.
Okay, and this is also a time that the nuclear tests were happened in
It happened
98.
yeah.
In 98, and there was this onslaught of all kinds of sanctions on us. So what was the finance ministry's response? Tell us the inner workings of the ministry at the time. Was there panic? What was it like?
So I think as far as the nuclear tests and the sanctions were concerned, the immediate fallout of that, as far as the economic affairs department where I was working, was that all multilateral, bilateral funding stopped. With the result that some of the programs started languishing. And there were some sectors where they didn't impose the sanctions, in the sense that if there were humanitarian aid, etc., coming through some bilateral assistance, that was not affected. We used to spend a lot of time in finding out ways in which we can get this started all over again. So that consumed a lot of energy. And the other part, of course, was that you felt that, the agencies are being unreasonable in imposing these sanctions. And it was not at the lower levels of bureaucracy that anything could be done. So can we spend this time in preparing projects for the future, as it were? So use this period for doing preparation, that when the pipeline opens again, can we pose more projects to them? So that is the kind of thinking that went on in the finance.
But what were the immediate fallouts of these sanctions in terms of the schemes that were stopped? What were the sectors that were hardest hit, and how was the ministry immediately responding to the to all these things?
So the hardest hit sectors were the infrastructure sectors, where the funding stopped. But one thing which we must understand is that most of these agencies were funding on the basis of reimbursement. So if the state had its own resources, and when I say state, it includes both the government of India and the state governments. If you had your own resources, let's say if there was a program for Power Grid Corporation of India, and if Power Grid could mobilize resources, then the implementation of its program will not suffer. Its costs might go up for the time being because it has to arrange finances. So I don't think the implementation of the programs suffered in that sense. There was a cost to pay if you are able to mobilize. But in some cases, the bilateral assistance, grants, etc., they ceased completely. So that is where the programs got seriously affected.
What was the brief from the finance minister at the time? I believe Mr. Yashwant Sinha was the finance minister.
He was the finance
What
minister.
was the brief to his bureaucrats like at the time?
I think he, of course, would always try to comfort us by saying that, don't worry, I mean, these things will get sorted out.
There was
So,
always this belief in the government that this is a temporary setback.
oh yeah, absolutely. So in that sense, I don't think there was a panic in the government. And we were a little comforted by the fact that when we would speak to our counterparts in the multilateral agencies, they would also feel that this is a temporary thing. It will get sorted out. You have to get one or two countries, mainly the US, back on the table. Once they relent, then things will smoothen again.
As IAS officers, what is the degree to which you would interact with these international agencies, or what is the interaction of IAS officers, bureaucrats who are posted here in India in the center? What is the degree of interaction that you have with your counterparts, say in the US? Because one would think that a lot of this work is handled by the diplomats, but as IAS officers, what is your relationship with them like?
Yeah, so it depends on the ministry that you're in, and it
Finance.
depends on, so talking about finance, and particularly Department of Economic Affairs. So Economic Affairs has a substantial part to do with foreign agencies, both multilateral and bilateral. So they are your counterparts, and Economic Affairs is the counterpart of all these agencies, whether it was the USAID, in even the Ford Foundation, for example, or KFW, all kinds of agencies were, the nodal point was the Economic Affairs. So your interaction with them was very substantive, both in terms of providing them inputs for finalizing their strategy for India. So when I remember when I was in DA, USAID was finalizing its regional strategy for India and the neighboring countries. So there was a lot of input which we would provide. Similarly, negotiating loans, specific loans. The DA was the coordinator, and you would be heading the negotiations for any loan which, let's say, I was handling Asian Development Bank. So the loans for Surat Menor Highway, the loans for Power Grid, the loans for GAIL, all those loans, the nodal person was the DA. So you had to be part of that. And of course, the other interaction with them is evaluation of projects. So particularly in DA, it's a very active interaction with foreign agencies.
And if there's aid coming, say, from a particular country, then are you having constant communication with the bureaucracy in that country, or is that routed through diplomats?
There are two things which happen. One is that all these foreign agencies are also government agencies, and they belong either to the Ministry of Finance or they belong to the Foreign Affairs Ministry. As you as government representative also interact with your counterpart in that administrative ministry. So take the case of DFID in UK. Earlier it was separate, it belonged to the Finance Ministry. Now it has been shifted to the Foreign Affairs Ministry. So then your interaction to that extent will change. But again, that interaction is very active. And I think the other thing is that whenever these delegations would come to India, then you would be the person who would be the first point of contact.
These were of course, the years of the Vajpayee government. Now, we know for a fact that it's considered one of the most reformist governments that we've had. Uh, was that actually the case? When you look back, was it one of the most reformist periods of our recent history? And also, did you have any personal interactions with the Prime Minister then, Mr. Vajpayee?
Well, I don't think I had any interaction directly with him, but there was a lot of interaction with the Prime Minister's office. And that happened because I was dealing with the infrastructure sector. There is a division in DA which is called infrastructure. And as director, as joint secretary, I was in charge of that division. So take the national telecom policy, which was revised in 1999. Take the initial idea of leasing of airports. Take the public-private partnership model for roads. Take the Enron, the signing of the power purchase agreement and the fallout of that later. So all these things had a nucleus in DA because the policy making happened with consultation of DA, because DA at that time was the only place where all this knowledge about different sectors was housed. If you go to the roads and transport ministry, that time it was called surface transport, they would know about roads. They would know about railways. Railways would know about their own ministry. Telecom would know about its own. But here was DA, which was the repository of maximum amount of knowledge, both financial as well as legal, because these were new structures that were being tried, public-private partnership. So that was one. But also, I must tell you that, for example, the national telecom policy, which got revised, it also, that was also the period when the entire telecom sector, as it were, including the ministry, changed. Because earlier there used to be a department of telecommunication. Then it was disbanded and it was turned into Department of Telecom and Department of Telecom Services. And then the Department of Telecom Services got converted into BSNL. So I was on the board of the first BSNL as a representative of DA. We were involved in almost everything that happened. The first public-private partnership road project was DA was involved in that very actively. The making of all the model concession agreements, that DA was involved. Of course, later it shifted to the Planning Commission. But a lot of work of this nature used to be done in DA. The Enron case, for example, when they invoked Government of India's guarantee, it was DA who was facing the heat. And in fact, I appeared as a defense witness for the Government of India even after I had left DA. And I had to go to the arbitration court in London to appear for the government. So DA used to play a very crucial role, which probably it does even today.
When you look at these years, do you think this was happening in, there was actually a larger vision of disinvestment, or were these things happening in a more piecemeal ad hoc kind of way, or did the government have a larger vision, and if there was that vision, was it communicated explicitly to the bureaucrats?
I think there was a larger vision in the sense that, take the case of disinvestment that you mentioned, there was a disinvestment commission which was set up, and that commission went into the nitty-gritty of which companies to disinvest, and it prepared a proper rationale for doing what it recommended to be done. So I think government was quite serious at that time. That was the time, incidentally, when the Department of Disinvestment was created, which is now called DPIM. Mr. Arun Jaitley was the first minister of that department. So I think there was a lot of seriousness about undertaking economic reforms, undertaking infrastructure development in a big way. The first NHDP was conceived at that time, the National Highway Development Program, which popularly was called the Golden Quadrilateral, connecting Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, Kolkata, Delhi. That was the first Golden Quadrilateral, which was conceived in the time of Mr. Vajpayee. It got named as NHDP, National Highway Development Program. So many of these, the universalization of telecom licenses.
Hmm.
That was done at that time.
Hmm.
So there could be many instances which one can cite.
Hmm.
The creation of the tariff authority for major ports, the creation of TRI, the regulatory agencies in the power sector.
So, when you were in service in this posting at the time, did you know that this is a very crucial moment in sort of our economic history? Did you have that understanding?
I think we were all very excited, very conscious of the fact that here was a phase in which the government was saying that, look, I'm going to restrict myself to policy making. I'm not going to regulate because the regulator should now be different, especially to avoid conflict of interest. In telecom, if the government owned BSNL and MTNL and it provided telecom services, and if there were private players also, you couldn't be also making policies and regulating the industry. So you created a regulator. The same thing happened in the electricity sector. You created a CERC and SERC for all the states.
But it's another matter altogether that these bodies also now then get headed by retired officers, which is a bit of a problem.
I mean, yeah, somebody could say that. Although I think there is provision in the act for people to come from private sector.
But that rarely happens.
Yeah, it may not happen for whatever reasons, but there is a provision that people with adequate experience and knowledge and stature from private sector could be inducted in the regulatory agencies.
Hmm. Hmm. So, how was during again these Vajpayee years? What was the communication of the PMO with other ministries like? What were the interactions? How centralized was the Prime Minister's office? What calls did they take and what calls did they not take?
I don't know if I can generalize, but as I said, that the sectors that I was dealing in, because they were very crucial infrastructure sectors, uh, the PMO would always like to be kept informed. For example, when the Enron invoked Government of India's uh, counter guarantee, obviously, I mean, this was something unprecedented. So you can't have a situation where PMO would not like to be kept informed because these things got discussed at various levels throughout the world. So I think the atmosphere was that on all important matters, PMO should be informed, and wherever you think necessary, their guidance should be sought.
But it was the ministries that were seeking the guidance of the PMO. It was not an overbearing PMO that was interfering in.
I think it could be a bit of both, depending on which sector you're talking about.
Hmm. Hmm. Very quickly, you had a brief stint in the center during the UPA-II years as well, right? In the Home Ministry. This is post 2008. 2008 has just happened. What was the Home Ministry like at this time? Because I believe the NIA was constituted at this time under Mr. Chidambaram. The CCS was constituted at this time under Mr. Chidambaram. So, what was going on in the Home Ministry post 2008, the 2008 attacks?
So I think when I joined MHA in 2009 April, there had been a certain background in which the Home Ministry came in the limelight because of the Mumbai attacks. And Mr. Chidambaram took over as Home Minister. So there was a lot of spotlight on how Home Ministry is going to now ensure everybody in the country that internal security is top priority, number one, and adequate resources are being provided. And let's not forget, the left wing extremism problem had also sort of gained ground, considerable ground. So MHA was dealing with all these issues and trying to take the states on board with them to deal with these problems. For example, the left wing extremism problem. Even though MHA tried to give a lot of power and role to the central agencies, the paramilitary forces, as they were called at that time. Now they're called Central Armed Police Forces. So it was at that time then the induction of CAPFs in left-wing extremism area started.
Say that again. Induction of CAPF office.
CAPFs in tackling
Right.
left-wing
Okay.
extremism
Okay.
started.
Hmm.
So it was a uh, very significant thing to move these people out, whether it was BSF or CRPF or ITBP. These guys were not trained to deal with left-wing extremism because that's a different kind of problem. So to retrain them, to find places where they can be deployed, to create the confidence of the local people in the central paramilitary forces. I think that was a huge challenge and lot of effort, lot of time went into this of the Home Ministry. And keep the states on board because the states should not feel that this is a law and order issue and we should be tackling this. So that was one. And then the creation of hubs in the country of the National Security Guard, NSG. Earlier, NSG was just confined to Manesar. That time, government took a decision that there should be 4 regional hubs created for NSG. Mumbai, Hyderabad, Chennai, Kolkata. So these hubs were created at that time. And the entire security apparatus, you mentioned the NIA or the NatGrid and several other initiatives were taken at that time.
So especially the left wing extremism, I do want to zoom in a little bit on that. So the police was handling left wing extremism in different states before the CAPS. How were these people actually trained? How were CAPF troops trained to do this? Can you tell us some details about this? Because I think this was a very pivotal shift in how left wing extremism in India was handled.
So I think 2 things were done. One is that the officers belonging to that state which was facing the problem, some of those officers were identified to impart training to CAPF personnel.
Police officers.
Police officers. And some of the resources of the army, especially for training, they were also utilized. So I think government went about it fully sensitive to the fact that it cannot expose these central paramilitary forces without adequate training. And mind you, it was not as if it was a very smooth thing. You had the Dantewada incident where 76 CRPF personnel were eliminated in one particular incident.
Were you posted in the Home Ministry when
Yes,
Dantewada
very,
happened?
very much.
And what was the reaction like? And
well, I mean, I think there was complete shock in the ministry that such a thing could happen because gradually government of India was thinking that it's taking control on things, and then this thing happened. But then it also revealed certain lessons, and the lesson was that it's not going to be an easy task. If you don't know the terrain, if you don't know the people in that area, if you don't cultivate contacts in that area, then the left-wing extremists can really fool you around. So I think these lessons gradually were imbibed. And that is how, with the passage of time, and incidentally, I was again in the finance ministry towards the end of my career as finance secretary, and I could see that the number of districts classified as LWE affected districts, it came down sharply in about 7-8 years.
And do you think most of what the achievements that we've made with regard to eliminating left-wing extremism has to do with some of the calls that were taken at that time in this 2008, 2009, 2010 period by Mr. Chidambaram?
I don't know whether you can attribute all of it to one decision because it has been a continuous process. I think what that phase did was to weld the state and central governments together.
State governments together.
State governments and central government together to fight the common cause. I think that was one fundamental thing. And then Government of India also came up with innovative schemes like providing additional resources to the district magistrates or for that area for overall development of schools, for making roads and all that. So that is the way I think this problem has been successfully handled.
So towards the end of the UPA-II, we know for a fact that there was a lot of conversation around policy paralysis. Tell us how bad was it really, and was it bad at all? Was this rhetoric founded in what was actually going on in the government?
I think what happened and why this impression got created. If you take the case of environment, for example, because environment ministry was considered to be one sector or one regulatory ministry which probably came in the way of many projects. So I think the concerns pertaining to environment, they became sharper at that time. If you analyze the entire phase of that 10 years of that period, and I'm not talking about UPA alone, but in the beginning of this century, I think what happened was that government realized that they need to equally focus on some of the social sectors, some of the other aspects of governance, which probably were not given proper attention or enough attention in the flurry of economic reforms. So you find a period where right to education, right to food security, right to information, all these things are happening. Uh, in the environment space, you find the regulations regarding environment clearances, they are changing. The Forest Rights Act issues are changing. Panchayat Act has changed. So all these things are happening during that period. So environment became some kind of a fetish. And because it was a fetish, nobody could take that sector easy. And I have felt when I was Secretary Environment that perhaps what happened and what happens generally is that if you are not able to make sensible laws, you end up making difficult laws. And when you make laws difficult, then you create a stalemate. Because the people who are managing those laws, it's not easy for them to take decisions. So I think that is one feature which is happening at that time. The other is also that there was a feeling that the private sector was taking a lot of undue advantage of many of the programs of government. So whether it was the power sector or it was road construction, a general impression started gaining ground that people had got into these contracts either knowing that they will not be able to implement these projects and somehow they will manage their way through the government, or by quoting figures which are far higher than the costs which were projected. So in either case, uh, the ability of the government to regulate this kind of phenomena, it came under question.
But certainly, this impression that there were multiple power centers in the government at the time. We had, Mr. Subhash Garg also on this show, and he mentioned, in fact, this is an instance that he's mentioned of in his book as well, where the environment minister at the time, Ms. Jayanti Natarajan, did not show up for a meeting with the prime minister, waiting for her for about 40 minutes, and she showed up 40 minutes late. So was that it, how did that environment actually affect policy making, decision making, and was there a problem of having multiple power centers?
I don't know whether I mean I can talk about multiple power centers, but I can certainly tell you that the environment ministry itself evolved with the passage of time. And yes, there was this problem of a perception that it's a very negative obstructionist ministry. But very interestingly, when I joined as Secretary Environment, so I discovered that there are not many instances where these guys have said no. But the problem was that they would not say yes either. So, what we emphasized was, and credit should go to the present regime for that the emphasis was that, look, you must decide this way or that. If you want to say no, say upfront that we will not be able to do this. And that is how, in fact, I presented statistics to the Parliamentary Standing Committee that how the time taken for providing environment clearances and forest clearances had reduced. And it had reduced not because of dilution of any procedure. It had reduced because of application of technology, by making the system online, by creating certain changes in the system, which contributed a lot to bringing about efficiency of time. If I can give you one example, the environment clearance used to go through 2 stages. It still does. You first got the terms of reference of your environment assessment impact study cleared. That process would take about 8 months. For any investor, you want to set up a cement plant or you want to set up any other kind of industry, first you submitted the TOR of an environment impact assessment study, which you will carry out. The ministry would take 6 to 8 months to approve the TORs. Then you did the study. That is your outlook, how much time you take to do the study. Came back and then applied for environment clearance. So the simple thing that we did, which at that time seemed very difficult, could we systematize and standardize the terms of reference? So it took us about 6 months, and I think for more than 32 sectors out of 36, we standardized the TORs. And we said that these are the standard TORs. You want to set up a cement plant, this is the TOR. Now, based on this TOR, you can carry out this impact assessment study. But there is a precondition. A, you need to register yourself online. And B, the ministry reserves the right and the responsibility to suggest an additional term within 30 days. If you don't do it in 30 days, you are free to accept that TOR as your TOR. So that immediately brought down the clearance time from 8 months to 1 month. So these kind of changes took place, and I think the ministry got into a dialogue with everybody who's applying, make the system as open as possible so that people don't have any apprehensions or suspicions or misgivings. You tell them that, sorry, we are not going to clear this project. That's the end of the story. Rather than keep repeating. So I would encourage officers that please ask all the questions that you want to ask, but please ask at one time.
So, what was impeding this kind of smoothness in the UP years? Do you think it was a weak PMO that thwarted this kind of?
I think there was not enough thrust on this.
What do you mean?
So the thrust comes from the top. And if there is an overall environment created that we need this thing to be done or straightened, it is, and I can tell you, for example, that in the near 2 years that I spent in the Ministry of Environment, there was not even one instance where anybody told us that this project needs to be cleared. But things started happening smoothly because of sheer systematization, nothing else.
Then, of course, you served as Environment Secretary during this, under the Modi government, and you also served as the Finance Secretary. First the Expenditure Secretary, if I'm not wrong, and then the Finance Secretary. Now, this is also a very eventful period in the Finance Ministry. Demonetization happens, GST happens, NPA. Also, the quality of Indian economic data comes into question. Tell us some of the most significant moments in your stint as in the finance ministry, and if you just have to now look back, what do you think was the overarching, or what continues to be the overarching economic policy vision of this government?
So you spoke of a few things. Those things happened, but let me tell you a few things which you didn't talk about. For example, one of the things that the ministry focused on was the Expenditure Reforms Commission report, which was headed by Bimal Jala. And I know that the committee gave more than 250 odd recommendations, and how systematically we went about implementing each one of them. To give you one example, the committee suggested that there should be a data bank, a centralized data bank for all the autonomous institutions which are funded by the government of India. You will be surprised that at that time, this thing did not exist at one place. Ministries may have their own information, but centralized level, it was not done. So it took us a long time, almost a year, to get this data bank established. And then we came to the extraordinary conclusion that Government of India was funding more than 500 organizations. Some of the ministries were funding 100 organizations. They were not even aware of that. There were institutes which were running in the same city doing almost similar things. And when we aggregated, we found that Government of India on an annual basis was giving grants of more than 60,000 crores to these organizations. So things of this sort. The second thing was the merger of the railway budget with the main budget. That had been going on for a long time. But finally, because of the political will and the direction, it happened. And it happened very smoothly. The other landmark, which obviously people don't recognize, is the rewriting of the General Financial Rules, the GFR as it is called. It is a Gita Bible for all public procurement. And it has been revised only 3 times in the history of India till then. So in 2017, the entire GFR was rewritten. Basically, the purpose was, can you bring government procurement procedures in line with what is possible to be done through modern technologies? What are the current market practices? The gem which you see now was created as a result of that. So, I mean, and then of course, dividing the budget, presenting it in revenue and capital expenditure. Earlier, it was all plan and non-plan. So many of these things got done. The focus on PFMS, it's so important. The Public Finance Management System. It was initiated long back, but it just was languishing in a sense. It was not receiving adequate attention. So suddenly we realized that this is potential. And the idea was actually that whether for government expenditure, can you replicate the DBT model? The direct benefit transfer, which was for individual beneficiaries, can the government expenditure also have a similar tracking, where all resources can be tracked to the last rupee?
So, there are so many things to double click on, but there's also paucity of time. So, my earlier question, how do you now assess the economic vision of this government? What marks it as different from the previous governments, from say the Vajpayee government or the UPA-II government? Is there anything in particular that stands out for you in how they think about economic policy?
So if I were to put my finger on 3 or 4 things, one, of course, the feeling that you get, which is borne out by facts, is that this government has kept fiscal deficit under control always. It's very sensitive to it, rightly so. The second thing is that given the vicissitudes of economy, both Indian and global, the government has provided adequate resources for capital expenditure, which has kept a lot of projects and economy on the move. If you see, the share of capital expenditure has been growing as far as the government is concerned. So that is the other thing. The third is this major emphasis on the digitization of economy through the JAM Trinity. I think it's very important. People may not realize the value of this, but both in terms of individual passing of resources to individual as well as government expenditure. I gave you the example of PFMS. The advantage we saw was that the funds which were floating around, that reduced substantially. So the cost of borrowing would automatically get affected because of that. So, and the fourth thing, I said capital expenditure, but I think there is one more thing which is noteworthy in the last few years, is there is a lot of emphasis on monitoring of big infrastructure projects.
Right.
And the effort to resolve bottlenecks. And that is not to say that bottlenecks don't exist. If you go to the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, they will still dish out a report saying that there is so much time overrun, cost overrun in so many projects. But I think this kind of single-minded effort to resolve bottlenecks is a distinguishing feature, I would say,
Of this
of this. Yeah.
Right. Through this time, your minister was, of course, Mr. Arun Jaitley, and he even now continues to be a bit of a legend in Delhi. Tell me some your impressions of him, any experiences working with him that sort of are etched in your memory. How was he like as a minister?
So, a few things that have stayed in my mind is he never appeared to be flustered. He was always very, very cool, no matter what the subject. Number two, he was very well informed. Number three, he had a story to tell on everyone and everything. He had so much fund of uh, information, and his networking was very good. His personal relations, I think, were excellent. So he was on terms with people. He could pick up the phone no matter who the other person is across party lines. He could talk to them. And he seldom interfered in your work. He would see that the work is getting done smoothly. I don't remember a single instance where he called me to discuss a file before it was being put up.
Hmm.
So you were pretty much free to write what you thought was right. And I don't even remember an instance where he overruled me on the file. But yes, I would be sensitive enough to brief him on some important matters before I sent the file to him. Because I thought that it's good to take his mind. What does he think? If we are at diametrically opposite or different thinking, then can we assimilate our thought together?
Hmm.
So it is not as if that, prior consultation with the minister, it is not that you are being servile to him. But what you are trying to do is, if there is a difference of opinion, can it be ironed out? You can convince each other. So it helps in quicker decision making. And I thought that was a good point about Mr. Jaitley. And finally, I remember when I retired. So one piece of advice he gave me. He said, Lavasa ji, दोपहर को सोना सीखो.
Acha.
हाँ, थोड़ा आराम करना सीखो. Because I never sleep in the afternoon, whereas Mr. Jaitley was very fond of taking his nap in the afternoon.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Hmm.
He would take rest for 10-15 minutes.
Hmm.
Everybody knew that. But also, I think because of some health reasons, it was necessary for him to relax.
Hmm. Hmm. I asked this question to so many people, but I think with you asking this question to you is going to be so much more informative because you've served in any ministry that I can possibly think of, from environment to tourism to finance, of course, to power, home. This debate on generalist versus specialist, how do you weigh in on that? And do you think that there are some ministries or some departments that probably are better off with specialists?
So this debate is, I think, as old as anything that you can think of. My view in the matter is that, administration itself is a specialization. So it is a folly to think that those who belong to the administrative service are generalists. It is a different matter that the composition of service is changing, but let's not get into that. After all, as an administrator, what are you doing? I think your essential role is to optimize the utilization of your resources. And when I say resources, I don't mean financial resources alone. Manpower is a big resource. So don't think that you know everything. And don't think that just because you are in the pyramid, you are sitting at a place where you will be asked to take a decision. But all the inputs are available to you from experts. So the quality of decision making can be considerably improved if professionals are allowed to have their say. Ultimately, because the structure is such that you have to take the decision, but you can always be benefited by their advice. So this debate between generalists and specialists, I think it's a pretty unnecessary debate. Yes, there can be good generalists and there can be bad generalists. Equally, there can be bad specialists and there can be good specialists. You have had instances of both kinds in the government system, where specialists have been appointed secretaries, they may not have succeeded.
Hmm. But this trend that you see in the government of increasingly having a lot of consultants, do you think that's a healthy trend?
It depends on how you utilize the consultants. Because I have always felt that within the government, you need the capacity to utilize consultants.
What do you mean?
So you have to understand why you are utilizing them. Whether you want a specialist advice, whether you want an outside advice, whether you want assistance in monitoring and evaluation. So if you utilize them for any of the three things that I've mentioned, it's good because all knowledge doesn't reside within the government. And sometimes it so happens that the system of decision making in the government is such that the same idea coming from within the government may not be accepted. But the idea coming from outside, from a so called expert, finds resonance in the government. So that's a tactical utilization of consultants.
Do you think they're used well right now?
I don't know. I've been out of the government for the last 7 years, 8 years now. So, but I see that there is a lot of consultants who are employed. And I think sometimes they also add color to your presentations, etc. Because they're very good in making presentations, but also they're very fast in doing analysis, etc. So some of these capacities don't exist within the government.
I've deliberately kept away from the period at Election Commission, a very eventful one that most of our viewers already know about. But I have to ask this before you go. When you look back at 2019 now, does it feel like the health of the institution of the Election Commission is in a worse off state now than it was?
It's different. I don't know whether it is worse or better because it's for people to decide. But certainly, the institution faces far more challenges than it used to in the past.
Thank you so much, sir. This has absolutely been an enthralling conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.